Okay, the headlines. It is September. We have, during this month, a number of events from the United Nations. First of all, on the 23rd of September, it's the UN's first ever Food Systems Summit. And then 1 week later, on the 29th of September, we have the International Day of Awareness of Food Loss and Waste. So a very opportune moment to speak with Dr. Simon Lockrey of the Food Waste CRC, that's Corporate Research Centre, and that is in Australia. We talked about food waste reduction of 50% by 2030. That's a global target outlined by the Sustainable Development Goals. We also talked about the consumer perceptions of packaging, because at the moment it is really the food that has a lot more impact on the environment than the actual packaging of that food. Now the CRC, they have 120 million Australian dollars of funding from industry, from government. That is the biggest food waste funding in the world. So he's going to make a massive difference. I asked him, how is he doing that? Now, some other headlines. Positive news is that research shows that corals can pass on climate change resilience to their offspring. Not so positive news is that in Indonesia, the Komodo dragon is at risk of extinction as rising sea levels destroy habitat. And this is the first status change in more than 2 decades. Negative and positive. First of all, sharks are in decline due to climate change, but positive news, the tuna population is on the path to recovery. All right, in other news, China opens a big data center in support of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. This article points out that the promise for data sharing is clouded, and it's clouded by the government's clampdown on data at home. I would like to point out myself that 2019 coal-powered energy accounted for more than 57% of China's energy consumption in 2020. So last year, China is leading the world in new coal power plants. They are building more than 3 times as much new coal power capacity as all the other countries in the world combined. And that was last year. Coal is mainly carbon, so when it's burnt, it reacts with oxygen in the air to produce carbon dioxide, which is a heat-trapping gas. You can guess the rest. In my opinion, China is trying to control the data as well as the conversation. All right, talking about trying to control the conversation, the Murdoch Press, which is the Australian empire, they will support now net zero emissions by 2050. So what it means is they will try to control the public story and delay climate action as much as possible. However, there's a group called Get Up, which is at getup.org.au. They will beat Murdoch Press at the climate story. However, it may be wise not to underestimate this massive empire owning hundreds and hundreds of international publishing outlets. In the UK, that is The Sun, The Times. In the US, that is Wall Street Journal, New York Post, Fox News, Fox Corporation. So they are highly influential. Okay, as mentioned, we spoke with Dr. Simon Lockrey of the Food Waste CRC, that's Corporate Research Centre based in Australia. I will put the full interview in our podcast so you can listen to that. I reached out to Simon. I read a number of articles, one from Smart Company with the title Australia wastes an average of 7.3 million tons of food. Now, I believed that Simon had been working on changing these issues, is working on the 50% food waste reduction by 2030 as outlined by the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals.
We've sort of been working on for a while. We've set up some major research structures in Australia to address the issues. Reduction is really important. Transformation of waste is important with waste that we can't reduce. And engagement is really important to try and engage consumers, supply chain actors, so industry as well as the consumer, public, about how we can reduce food waste. And we're aiming to do that by 50% by 2030 as per the Sustainable Development Goal 12, Target 12.3.
I asked Dr. Lockrey about his article talking about food packaging, which is normally not associated with being positive for the environment. However, in the article, and I quote, packaging can protect food, prolong shelf life, and reduce environmental impact by reducing food waste. And in a BBC video, I quote, food actually has a much higher environmental load than the packaging that was containing that food.
So what's really interesting about packaging from my perspective is, and a lot of other scholars actually, is that it gets a really bad rap, pardon the pun. And for good reason. Like, you know, we've basically moved to a system where it's full consumption mode. Like, we're hyper consumers and everything has to be easy. We've created a system where we deliver everything in packaging. But the reason the packaging is there is to protect the products, right? So if we are going to dial back packaging significantly, we do need to transform our systems of supply. The food is inordinately more impactful than the packaging. Even if the packaging gets tossed and becomes, you know, a problem, you know, a biodiversity problem, you know, going out and killing, you know, fish and birds and stuff like that. It's a real paradox. And it really blows people's minds when you say this, but that's the reality. Like, you're actually creating heaps of other environmental issues by not consuming your food and wasting it and wasting all of that environmental load that went into it, and potentially leading to things like methane production afterwards, or other nutrient-based impacts in waterways or other, you know, waste issues.
So I asked him, in the end, what is better for the environment? Packaging food as much as possible to extend shelf life, or less packaging food, whereby less packaging materials such as plastic end up in the environment.
And the ideal outcome is no packaging. So we should be aiming for no packaging, because if we can get everything to people intact by transforming our supply chains, by being smarter about how we consume and supply, and get to the ultimate goal of no packaging, great. There are other intermediate things we can look at, like reusable systems, which mean that the packaging doesn't go back into the system as a linear system, and we can get more and more value out of the material in the packaging, and we're not wasting all of that, you know, material load. We can obviously look at circularity with recycling and get much better at putting materials back in the system to become packaging or other products afterwards. They're all fine as well. But I mean, ultimately our aim is no packaging.
No packaging. Okay.
But the reality is now food waste is 6 to 8% of our global carbon emissions.
So
food waste. At the moment, if we keep our systems the same, yes. So we need to completely transform our systems. And we need to acknowledge that packaging plays a role, but we also acknowledge that packaging has an impact on the environment, but as does food and as does food waste. And so there's sort of this tension, these tensions playing off against one another, which create paradoxes that are probably counterintuitive to people's understanding of what's affecting the environment and what we class as the bad person.
I asked Dr. Lockrey, what is he trying to do?
What we're trying to do is change the system, the whole system, through our projects. So we're not just saying, you know, there's going to be an incremental change in a little bit of reduction of packaging. What we want is completely different systems so that we reduce packaging, reduce food waste to as close to zero as possible, and way less impact through wasted environmental load through the food system and packaging as a result. That's really the ultimate